A few weeks ago, we recorded this following episode while I was visiting Australia. Since then, the fires there have escalated considerably. Our thoughts are with the firefighters, people, and wildlife of Australia as they grapple with these catastrophic bushfires. Our show notes for this episode shares information for how you can donate to help Australians during these challenging times.
In the early days of the Laneway renewal, there was no plan or vision. It's just like, there was a lot of empty shops and squatters. So we got together because there was so much patient capital, cheap rent, and stuff and places to do stuff in. No one stopped us. Okay. We called it then illegal acts of love. We just went out and put on dance parties back in the early 90s and put on a big stereo keg. And the police would come, 2 hours later, but they wouldn't stop us. They could just shut it down because they could see what we were doing was good. And there was no people living in the city, so there was no complaints. Now we've started to see laneways in their third and fourth generation of traders. And the rents have gone up, of course.
Okay. Yeah.
So those first generation are mostly gone. And there's a whole heap of issues.
For the last few weeks, my wife, daughter, and I have been on the road as part of a family sabbatical. We're exploring 8 countries over the course of about 13 weeks as a way of reconnecting as a family and recharging for the upcoming decade. The second stop on our tour was Melbourne. Ranked as the second most livable city in the world by the Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Livability Index, I was excited to explore this place that I have long admired from afar. One of the things that makes Melbourne such a great place to be is its network of bustling laneways. These unique spaces owe their existence to the original survey of the city dating back to 1837. Back then, these laneways provided rear service access for servants and carts carrying goods to local businesses. And over the last number of decades, however, these laneways have been revitalized as public places for people to enjoy. So I wanted to talk to someone who knows the ins and outs of Melbourne's laneways.
My name is Gilbert Rochecouste. I'm the founder, managing director of Village Well. We're a placemaking organisation based in Melbourne, Australia.
Gilbert took me on a tour of some of the laneways within Melbourne's central business district, highlighting key aspects of their evolution and introducing me to some local characters along the way. After our walking tour, I sat down with Gilbert to talk to him a bit more about Melbourne's laneway culture. So let's dive in.
The first layout of the city was done by Robert Hoddle, and that's why it's called the Hoddle Grid of Melbourne, and they're quite big roads and boulevards, but also interconnecting those in the day where we had to, it was horse and cart, had little laneways, and in those laneways had others, mini laneways and connecting laneways. So they were all the back of house for the buildings, actually. And so we've been really fortunate to be gifted a unique grid. There's not too many cities in the world that has a grid like Melbourne. The gifting of those laneways has been quite unique. And having said that, they've only come back to life in the last 20 to 30 years and put Melbourne on the map. That's one of the key elements that make it one of the world's most livable cities.
Right. So the laneways themselves, they were somewhat neglected, underrun for a lot of years. And then in the 90s, it seems that there was a shift. Could you describe some of those key decisions and moves that started to animate those spaces?
Sure. I think it started back in 82, 83 when Melbourne was voted one of the not so great cities of the world, a donut city, and people would just leave after 5 or 6 o'clock. It was a dead city. No one was living in the city. There was lack of art and culture or trees and shade. And I think those civic leaders then, the planning minister and lots of other key leaders at the time, including Rob Adams, who I think came in 83, 84 to the city of Melbourne and is still there, worked closely with the key collaborators and property groups and really started to create a vision that will bring Melbourne would bring people back to Melbourne. It was a 9-to-5 city that turned its back on its river. So I think a palette of initiatives in the 80s, like Postcode 3000, which attracted people to residential back to the city, and that it created incentives for property owners, and they were given, planning, sort of speed of planning, DAs, development applications, through to rent, rate relief, and a whole heap of incentives, and through to the urbanism plan that Rob Adam did, and which later Yarngell supported. Places for people work back in the late 80s and early 90s, around reclaiming the street for people, and small footpaths doubled or tripled in size. And then the stone for Melbourne is bluestone. It was all bitumen then, concrete. They started to overlay the beautiful bluestone, which is all over the city, and the lack of treescape. It was hot as people didn't want to walk the streets, not only because it was small, because there was no shade as well. So the street planting, which is now quite incredible, and the obviously the big interventions of public civic anchors like Federation Square and the new museum and redevelopment of the Docklands added another bit of city making. And then the other changes in the planning and liquor licensing laws, where you couldn't buy a glass of wine, you had to buy a bottle, so people never sat down, and changing the laws was a battle, and because it was the pubs who owned the drinking establishments, and the 100 restaurants couldn't serve a glass of wine. They had to bring their own bottle and open a bottle. So that liquor licensing shifted the whole culture of Melbourne, liquor licensing. And so with more residences, better pavement activation and trees and shade, and that liquor licensing laws changing, we saw a revolution in small bars and music venues just flourish, like literally 100 within a few years opened up, and then suddenly they were allowed to trade on the street. New Savile on the street trading. So in that first 5 to 10 years in the mid-80s to 95, 97 really was a revolution that set the foundation to what we have now. And obviously the laneway art and public art interventions created, and the busking policies and street trading policies, all that together integrated, created because we had this grid, we could activate walkable spaces that were just for people.
Right. So you had the key bones of it.
And then we have, the largest trolley tramway network in the world. How good was that? So it already was a slow city.
Right.
No buses with big fumes or cars. We had trams everywhere. So that created an amazing network of walkability, and the network of laneways, where people just started to come back to these laneways. It was like, ducks to water. It's like we want to be with people, not cars. And then some major interventions happened in the city with the renewing of the river frontage back in the early 90s. Really created a sense of what I call the blue gold. People wanted to connect to water and green spaces, and sit and reclaim Birrong, which is the indigenous name for the Yarra River. And that's created a whole new experience for the city. So we're very fortunate, all these interventions, including enlightened developers coming in the mid-90s, late 90s, like Melbourne Central, and put laneways and activated its edges, and a shopping centre that took the air conditioning out, put bluestone. It acted more like a city than a shopping centre. Had a piazza, had community spaces, it had activated a transport hub underneath.
And what was the line you would use on the tour? That it curates, not
it
manages?
Curates and not manages.
Yeah.
Most shopping centres and retail, have a centralised retail management model. These are more curators and understand how to activate a place and make it sticky and lovable.
Right.
So if you make a place sticky and lovable and has all these great things in it, and then they use the concept of the power of free, which is a smart way for developers. The smart developers give away some public space,
Right.
or their private space to the public
Yeah.
in pocket parks or public squares, and create free entertainment and free events. So people come and put free public seating in their shopping centres where people could eat and connect and watch people buzz, like a city does.
Yeah, right.
So Melbourne Central is now the highest performing retail centre in the Southern Hemisphere. So they use curation and placemaking in a very strategic way, where I think, the old big box shopping centres are dying.
Yeah.
So they need they understood, and they took a blue ocean strategy where all the other were just swimming with the sharks.
Right. Right.
Consumerism, where they saw the citizen consumer.
Yeah, right.
And through using arts and culture, and as a city should, so the laneways are now evolving, obviously, and they've some would say are gentrified, not as politically active.
Yeah.
There's not as radical anti-Nike murals everywhere or anti-corporate. It's more interesting murals, but I think that's coming back now.
As a response to that. Yeah.
As a response to
its own success in a way.
Own success and overconsumption.
Yeah.
And climate change. Climate change will be the tipping point for all cities in the world. And I think we'll see cities reclaim their local heart and their resilient heart, and I suppose in one sense in more deliberative processes of giving power back to the community. That agency is the next revolution for us. That we have traders as placemakers and looking after the streets. We have citizens who are looking after our communities.
And in some instances of certainly projects we worked on, there's in looking at downtowns, there appears to be a bit of a trend of the ownership of a storefront, let's say, stops at the door, and the city, the municipal government needs to look after what's outside. Is there a different ethos in the laneways of Melbourne in terms of more of a, like you say, shopkeepers as placemakers, to feel like they really need to contribute and they're a part of that specialness of the place?
The shopkeepers and contributing to the streets. I think that's evolving.
Yeah.
If you look on the outer edge of Melbourne, we have great villages: Carlton, Brunswick, Richmond, Paran, South Melbourne, St Kilda. So those edge villages that are connected by the tram network, the trolley network, have great retailers who are a bit more activists, more regenerative, more local, community-based. You've probably seen them when you walk down Brunswick Street, Fitzroy. It's very gritty, interesting shops, local operators, local owners.
For sure.
There's a few thousand of those in Melbourne. We're very fortunate. The brand names, Starbucks had to close 10 of their stores in Melbourne. There's only one or two in the city, because how are you going to compete with Melbourne coffee baristas? And the community. But the tourists love Starbucks, so it's the same place, free Wi-Fi. So there's still going to be a market for that, but they're not going to cream the place, which I think is a good thing. So I think these traders, the principle and concept of Melbourne is, which sort of led a little bit, traders as placemakers is a powerful concept. So they're the ones who are curating events and giving back, and can pay it forward. Where every time I go get a soup or a sandwich, I'll put an extra $10, put a little sticky note for someone who might be less fortunate than me,
Right.
or homeless, and have a meal in a dignified setting. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a small thing. It doesn't fix the structural issues of, more social housing or affordable housing. But I think Melburnians have hopefully a more progressive ethos.
Yeah.
And celebrating multiculturalism and inclusiveness and accessibility. But we have our challenges. The rents have gone up in a lot of these laneways, and it's created a somewhat slight gentrification. We're getting slick, not franchises, but slick operators coming into the laneways that are changing the dynamics. But we've still got a good cohort of good operators. The major boulevards have got, Collins Street has your upmarket Louis Vuitton and all the brands.
Yeah.
Every city has those.
Yeah.
All global city.
Yeah.
And then you have the, all the restaurants along the riverfront and a couple of shopping centres that are keeping the people in the city, which I think are really important.
Yeah, for sure.
So shopping centres are their place.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Stop the leakage.
Right.
From leaving the city. We want people to stay in the city and walk everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And less
sure.
cars.
For sure. And if you had to pull some key lessons from the Melbourne laneway experience that folks in other corners of the world, and I know you're teaching folks about making place in other parts of the world, what about the laneway experience specifically do you think folks can take from the Melbourne experience?
Yeah, so I think there's more, in the beginning it was about starting small, and I think one operator, a good operator with great coffee or good food could be a domino effect, will attract others. So small is beautiful, so I think about walkability, the concept of grittiness. It's not about getting a sign writer or a marketing studio, it's about getting your friend's friend who has an artist friend to come in and who has a bit of passion and grit, and that has a mishmash, and you'll see bits of those everywhere in the laneways, and that's like an ecosystem. So I think that's really important. I think clustering is important. Some laneways have more sort of certain style of bars or food or a jazz bar as an anchor, or a little bookshop. The importance of art and signage, signage that becomes art, and the work that the city leaders have done in creating bluestone and nice artistic signage that's artistically hand curated and crafted. It's one off. The importance of working together as a trader guild community, which is really important. They curate their own events, like some traders in Hardware Lane pay a little, put money in the bucket every month, and they pay for 2 jazz bands that come every night.
Oh, wow.
They pay for it, not the city. But there's always something happening every night. Rain, hail or shine. I think, that's the power of enlightened retailers who they get it. It's bigger than me. It's about the we.
Yeah. And it also doesn't hurt business to have people to have an event every night.
$50, everyone puts $20 to $50 a night. And you got a full restaurant every night. It's nothing. It's that's just one person having an entree. You've just paid for it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I think also the sense of, I mentioned before, it's putting people first in these laneways, not cars, or shared space is really important. The importance of these laneways going somewhere.
Oh, okay.
It's destinational. It links up and up to another laneway, or crossing a street to another laneway, to another laneway. People will find those little Amtraks, and they become destinational in themselves.
Right.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think all of this starts to create a narrative, and every laneway should have its own story.
Yeah.
With its own artist or own bi-regional story or own local or Indigenous story.
Yeah.
Tell a story.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think,
for sure.
And I think, so the traders are really critical because they activate the place, they animate, and active frontages.
Yeah.
And open frontages are really important, so they're not closed off from the laneway. So the laneway experience continues into the restaurant.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That
sure.
design principle.
Yeah.
Or, we call it the hardware and the software talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly that's been my experience so far of, whether it's an ice cream shop or a restaurant or what have you, it really does feel fluid. And even when you're inside, the activity and what's going on outside is not very far away. You can, because oftentimes it gets positioned, the fluidity of it gets talked about almost from the perspective of someone outside of that frontage being able to see inside. But what I found here particularly is the opposite is equally as true and energizing in terms of, just grabbing really, really great ice cream and being able to see what's going on outside while I'm still inside has been really, really there. Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So I think, I think all these principles are really important because ultimately, if you have a small space and you create, people will be attracted by beauty. We found in our research beauty and intimacy together around a safe environment where people can walk, people will stay 20% longer. 20% longer.
Wow.
So people linger longer, and when they linger longer, they'll spend more money.
Yeah, for sure.
So beauty is an attractor.
Interesting.
So for us, obviously, we put a commercial narrative on everything, even though we're very socially and ecologically driven, place-driven. But, because 90% of all cities are built by the private sector, you've got to speak their language and talk to the principles.
These things work together instead of at odds with each other,
That's
which is
right.
how it often gets positioned.
That's right. So you need to tell them the principles that it takes many hands to create a great place, the wisdom's in the community, the, let's get beauty as an attractor, get people to linger longer, the public space is an anchor, the importance of, telling a story, and also ownership of place. All of these things. It's much harder in the private sector to get ownership of place, but that's where the elephant in the room is.
Yeah.
We've got to go there.
If it's 90%, then that's where the biggest opportunity is, right? Yeah.
That's right, with shopping centres or big streets full of retailers.
Yeah, for sure.
But we do have a role in obviously renewing, creating these beautiful public spaces and streets. So streets become, the anchor, because we have an English model of high streets. We adopted not the European model of piazzas. So we've got to work with that.
Yep.
We've got to create the new piazzas now.
Right.
But it's the street. So, I think we're in an exciting window of opportunity with Melbourne. Obviously, there's external tipping points, economic, cultural, population, and the big one, climatic. We may get... I was running a workshop for all our emergency management, organisations, electricity companies, fire, water, police, road, infrastructure, transport, and, we will most likely have 10 days over 45 degrees Celsius. It'll be like Saudi Arabia. So what do we do then when everything gets... Literally our farms will be burnt and our infrastructure will melt down. This is before 2030. So this will happen globally in different climatic shifts.
Yeah.
So even the government's waking up and preparing now.
Yeah.
So and if that's in the next 10 years, what will the city be?
Yeah.
A resilient city, a city that can adapt and move and build food security and energy security, but more importantly, cultural security and the energy for for groups, large groups, to not go into the despair and fear budget, but move into the hope budget. Because we need a hope budget in our cities, so people can quickly go, oh yes, this is what we'll do. We know our neighbours, everyone should know their neighbours, and then mobilise in precincts.
Yep.
So all these things will be really important.
Yeah.
And what we do and how we work together, how we,
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's an exciting space that we're looking at, but, we wish it didn't happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
But we have to move into that space because we don't see leadership in anywhere else. So as we do with Village Well, we try to lead from the front. But there's, we're very focused around, making a difference in people's lives from a placemaking and pushing government and private sector and to create better places for people.
And all the myriad benefits that come with that in terms of a more resilient community, a more economically vibrant community, and it goes on and on. That's why placemaking is such an interesting area of practice, and the work you're doing is super inspiring.
Thank you. It's great to have a chat, and it's great to know there's a like-minded group on the other side of the planet.
Other colder side of the planet.
Cool. So we'll come in your summer and have a visit one day.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about Melbourne's laneways was the diversity of spaces that they represent. From high-end retail shops to cheap takeaway food to pianos for the public to play. We found ourselves returning again and again to explore new kinds of laneways. The story of the evolution of the laneways highlights how there's no single solution to creating great space. The success of these laneways is a combination of many different kinds of folks taking a variety of actions over a long period of time. Intentional change, collaboration, and patience are necessary aspects to all kinds of good city building. Tune in to our upcoming episodes as we release our multi-part City Builder series. And as we continue our family sabbatical, we'll also be adding episodes about unique aspects of the cities that we visit along this tour. My wife, daughter, and I have been on the road as part of a family sabbatical. We're exploring 8 countries over the course of about 13 weeks as a way of reconnecting as a family and recharging for the upcoming decade.